What's it like to watch classic Who for the first time? Having grown up with doctors such as Eccleston, Tennant, Smith and Capaldi, I found myself reluctant to throw myself into those classic doctors past a few of their most iconic stories. However, as an adult, I have been itching to go back to the classic Who stories, and I figured I'd make some deep dives on the episodes as well, so that super fans and casual fans alike can join me on my journey of discovery. Today we're going to be checking out the first story in Doctor Who's long history, and potentially one of its most important stories. An Unearthly Child is the name of the first Doctor Who story broadcast in the UK. It's comprised of 4 parts, each running at 25 minutes, which is a far cry away from the 2005 revival, which saw most episodes tell a self-contained story. This story was written by Anthony Coburn, directed by Waris Hussein, and produced by Verity Lambert. Unfortunately for most Doctor Who fans, there isn't actually an easy way to watch these episodes, as they've not been included in the Classic Who category on iPlayer, despite the vast majority of available stories remaining on the website. This is all down to a rights dispute with Anthony Coburn's son, Steph Coburn, who very publicly announced he would not give the rights to the BBC unless they paid him an obscene amount of money. Therefore, the only way to actually watch this episode is through DVD or VHS, which I actually have. I had to go to great lengths to get this episode. I had to go all the way down to Havant just to pick it up in a CEX. I don't know whether it's easy to get anymore, but I had to fight tooth and nail for my copy, and I am clinging onto it until I am cold in that grave.
I'm sure something can be arranged.
Either way, this is a piece of the Doctor Who legacy that every fan should have in their collection. So as part of looking at these episodes, I decided to purchase the original Target books as well, so that I could gain as much understanding as I possibly could. This book is Doctor Who and an Unearthly Child, and it's written by Terrance Dicks. It was actually released in 1981, many years after the initial broadcast of the episode, when the show decided they would start novelizing all of their previous stories from the show and release them for a whole new audience of children in a time when streaming and DVDs did not exist. So the only way you could find out about previous Doctor Who stories was through these bad boys. The episode itself opens with one of the most recognisable theme tunes in all of TV, with a display of effects that really remind us that we're in the early 60s. Not only that, but the theme tune continues playing long after the Doctor Who title screen fades away. Instead, it continues to play over a policeman inspecting the gate to a rather iconic scrapyard, emblazoned with a name familiar to every Doctor Who fan: I Am Foreman. I actually researched I Am Foreman to see if there was any lore I was missing out on, because it's a name I've often heard thrown around and I've never really understood the importance. And apparently, this guy is a Gallifreyan monk who was exiled from Gallifrey after Rassilon's intuitive revelation. This was all revealed in a 2-part novel that was released in 1999 involving the 3rd and 8th Doctor, so maybe we'll check that story out one day and expand on this part of the lore. One minor addition to the book is that they actually have an increased focus on the policeman at the very start of the novel. Almost 2.5 pages are devoted to this policeman investigating the streets around Totter's Lane before discovering the scrapyard and the TARDIS. The policeman notices that something is odd about the random police box sitting in the scrapyard, but determines it must just be a worn-out model. There's also a mention of the scrapyard's caretaker, his granddaughter, and 2 teachers from a local school going missing, along with the mysterious phone box. But that's such a random thing to mention. What could that possibly be about? We then move to the location of Coal Hill School, where we meet Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, played by William Russell and Jacqueline Hill respectively. Barbara brings up a student that they both have, a 15-year-old called Susan, and she mentions how she's incredibly concerned about this girl. Now, I knew that Susan was a student at the school, but I wasn't actually aware that she was 15, so I decided to do a little bit of digging. And Susan was apparently 97 at the time of this episode, so clearly Gallifreyans have a great skincare regime. Maybe they should release it for us. Maybe they should. I actually found it hilarious that both teachers were discussing how strange Susan was, and their initial plan of action was just to stalk her to where she lives and work out what is happening from there.
What do we do? Ask her point blank?
No, I thought we could drive there, wait till she arrives and see where she goes.
Oh, all right.
There wasn't even a single second of, should we be doing this? How many lines does this cross? Should we really be stalking a student home after school hours? Nope.
Stupid doctor! Ah!
Listen, they say that it's dangerous on the streets today, but if teachers were allowed to stalk their students back in the 60s, I don't think it was much safer back then either. We then cut to Susan dancing, and I use that term loosely, to a song by John Smith and the Common Men. My ears pricked up because of the mention of John Smith, as that's usually the Doctor's pseudonym. Once again, their past is explored in a Big Finish audiobook, which I actually happen to own just randomly. I don't know how that happened, but apparently it's in my collection, so that's quite cool. We may return to the Common Men in the future, but for now, back to Susan and her incredibly awkward dancing. Clearly, they don't have Strictly Come Dancing on Gallifrey. The teachers come in and quiz Susan about where she lives, and Susan avoids the questions and focuses on the book that Barbara gave her to read. It's a book on the French Revolution, which has the most basic cover, with it simply stating the French Revolution. Clearly, someone pissed off the props department because they did not put any effort into this one. Before Ian and Barbara leave, Ian offers Susan a lift home, a cover story for finding out where she lives, as well as the mysteries surrounding her. If that wasn't creepy enough, Susan responds saying that she enjoys walking home in the dark as it's mysterious. If there's a phrase that has never been uttered in the English language, it must be, I like walking home in the dark. Maybe this should have been their first sign that they were dealing with an alien. We then transition to Barbara and Ian stalking Susan. I mean, looking out for her well-being. And they discuss all the strange things they've noticed about Susan.
She might be meeting a boy. Didn't that occur to you?
I almost hope she is.
The first thing brought up is Susan claiming Britain had a decimal system, which is really strange because decimalisation wouldn't hit Britain until the 15th of February 1971, almost a decade after the transmission of this episode. Was this the writers predicting the future? Yes, it was. I actually found it rather helpful that the book included a little bracketed section that explains the monetary system in the UK before decimalisation, because having been born this side of the millennium, I had no need to learn the conversions or to know how many shillings there were in a pound. I questioned why this would have been included in the novel, but considering this book was released in 1981, the majority of children reading this novel probably wouldn't have had that understanding either, having grown up with decimalisation either in their early years or into their teenage years when they actually had their own money to spend. Either way, this was a necessary explanation to a particularly outdated conversation. Another moment saw Susan mysteriously explain the fourth and fifth dimensions as time and space, which was a nice little tease for the adventures to come.
I feel frightened, as if we were about to interfere in something that is best left alone.
Next time, take your own advice.
Back to the stalking mission. I mean, welfare check. Ian and Barbara watch as Susan enters the scrapyard. But when they enter after her, she has completely disappeared. They look around and to no avail. Their welfare check has failed. Instead, we're introduced to the first Doctor. At the time, the only Doctor, although that doesn't quite have the same ring to it. I find it ironic that the first time we see Hartnell on screen, he's coughing, which would inevitably be why he left the show, citing illness from arteriosclerosis, which was most likely caused by Hartnell's smoking habits. Immediately, Hartnell feels like the Doctor, making cheeky asides to himself.
We saw her from across the street.
One of their pupils, not the police then.
I beg your pardon?
Whilst also goading them into getting a policeman to prove how silly they're being for believing a girl would randomly be in a scrapyard.
You believe she might be in there? It's not very substantial, is it? You both want to make fools of yourselves. I suggest you do what you said you'd do. Go and find a policeman.
I often wondered whether the first incarnation of the Doctor would feel the same as the one that I grew up with, but immediately I'm put at ease because this guy, definitely the Doctor. The book often adds extra bits of character motivation and thought to give more context to lines and words said by the actor. One instance I noticed was when Ian is questioning the Doctor and he turns the questions back on Ian, asking, "Why were you spying on her? Who are you?" To which Ian is surprised that he's now on the defensive. The book continues to say, somehow, it was as if he was the one who had to defend his actions. Well, yes, you do. You stalked Susan home from school, you broke into the scrapyard, and now you're harassing an older gentleman for no reason, and you're hearing voices? Listen, this is the 1960s. They'd lock you up for that. Unfortunately for the Doctor, Susan opens the door to the mysterious police box, with Ian and Barbara charging inside, while we cut to the interior of the TARDIS. It's a very bare TARDIS, especially to the ones I grew up with, but it instantly feels like home, and is certainly a lot more spacious than I initially thought. Obviously, Ian and Barbara cannot believe their eyes, confused how the TARDIS could be bigger on the inside. Although that phrase isn't uttered in this episode, its first use coming from the 10th anniversary story, The Three Doctors, which wouldn't air until almost 10 years later. Ian voices confusion about how this could be possible. The Doctor says one of my favourite lines of the episode, which is,
You don't understand, so you find excuses.
and that's such a fantastic way of explaining how some people see the world. The Doctor also laughs at these mere mortals.
Your arrogance is nearly as great as your ignorance.
Will you open the door? Open the door!
Which is such a beautiful display of this Doctor's arrogance as well as his superiority. Either way, a very Doctorish moment. We then learn that Susan came up with the term TARDIS, standing for Time and Relative Dimensions in Space, which is fascinating because it's often forgotten that TARDIS is not what all Time Lords call their boxes. The Doctor also drops some exposition about their background, revealing themselves to be exiles from their home planet, although the words Gallifrey and the Time Lords would not be used until many years later. For now, they're an unknown species from an unknown planet. As the Doctor continues to taunt Ian and Barbara, we see a few shocking things. The Doctor locks the teachers inside, saying they cannot leave, and when Ian attempts to fiddle with the controls on the console, he is electrocuted. Now, I'm not saying that this is the worst thing that I've seen on the TV show Doctor Who, but they're not exactly doing a great job of making this guy likeable. I mean, the Doctor's a bit of a dick. Listen, maybe he's more of a grower than a shower, which, as I'm realising reading this out, shower and shower, they're written the same. That's very weird.
See, it's what we call a homonym.
Then we get to see the very first time the TARDIS takes off and departs in a fabulous segment I love to refer to as whoosh whoosh time. The TARDIS goes whoosh, and the show cuts to a random still of London that slowly zooms out to expose the border of the frame. It was a weird choice, but given this was 1963 and they probably had limited options, I'll give them a free pass, but this is your only one. We also got a strange montage of swirling effects fading in and out of shots of each of the cast members, which I assume was to give the illusion that they were travelling through time and space, but just made it look like everyone had taken a dodgy edible and they were just trying to ride the wave. As the TARDIS lands, Ian and Barbara are knocked out, and we get a glimpse of the TARDIS in a brand new location. Where? No idea. When? Even less of an idea. But either way, the first episode ends on a mighty cliffhanger. A shadow falls in shot as a mysterious figure appears to have watched the TARDIS materialise, and that's all we're left with until the next episode. Overall, a fantastic introduction to our four main characters, and honestly, it was a really good cliffhanger that made me want to press play immediately. I mean, I watched all four back to back, but either way, it made me go, let's watch the next one now. The Cave of Skulls is the second part of this story, picking up exactly where we left off, with an imposing shadow staring directly at the TARDIS. The camera reveals the figure to be a caveman, giving the audience the first glimpse as to when this story is taking place, even if we hadn't quite got an answer as to where. The logical answer is Earth, but who knows? This could be a random, secret alien civilization that has similar biology to humans. Now, realistically, we're on Earth, aren't we? We then transition to the rest of the tribe, led by a caveman named Zar. All of the cavemen speak English, which made me chuckle because the show hasn't quite established that the TARDIS gets inside your head and automatically translates things. So it was just kind of funny watching the cavemen speak English and not stuttering on a single word. Either way, Zar is attempting to make fire, as he's the son of a legendary fire maker. And he's failing miserably. Not only is he just twisting a bone around in some ash, but he genuinely thinks that's how you make fire. Now, I'm not saying I can make fire myself, but all I'm saying is, at least I know that you need something to burn in order to make fire. We're introduced to some more key characters in this story alongside Zar. Her is Zar's girlfriend, although I feel like the word property is more applicable by the way they talk about her. Cal is the guy who stumbled upon the TARDIS as he was attempting to find food for the tribe. There's an old woman who spent most of this episode claiming they would never make fire, and honestly, she was kind of funny. She had some great moments where she just seemed like a senile old bat. And I appreciated that. I'm also not sure what the life expectancy is of a cave person, but I'm sure she's well past it. Now we come to my favourite part of the episode, where Ian and Barbara slowly come to the realisation that they have moved. There's a lot of faffing about before they leave the TARDIS, and it's mostly the Doctor laughing at Ian because Ian can't quite believe that this is anything but a trick. I can understand why he'd think that, but at this point, the evidence is overwhelming. You've definitely moved location. In fact, during this conversation, the Doctor mentions the phrase Doctor Who for the first time, and it actually caught me off guard.
Just open the doors, Dr. Foreman.
Eh? Doctor Who? What are you talking about?
I didn't expect the Doctor to be the first person to say that, but here we are. As they head outside the TARDIS, I noticed that the outside of the doors were almost identical to the inside of the doors to the TARDIS. However, when we cut to the outside, the doors are that of a police box, so I was caught off guard as to why that happened. I'm assuming budgetary restrictions, but it just caught me off guard is all. Outside the TARDIS, a couple of interesting things happen which give us a further insight into the Doctor and Susan and what their life is like. The Doctor and Susan both separately take note that the TARDIS didn't change from its police box facade.
Why hasn't it changed? Dear, dear. How very disturbing.
Which would go on to be a running joke about the fact that the chameleon circuit is broken and has been for 62 years. However, it's not expanded on much past this comment as they're interrupted by the Doctor being kidnapped by Cal. What was the Doctor doing, you might ask? He was gathering samples of rocks and plants to determine the time period. Apparently, the TARDIS doesn't have the functionality to tell you when you are, or even where you are. Bit of a shit time machine, innit? The Doctor's kidnap was a hilarious moment that probably would have been a lot more impactful when it first aired. Firstly, we're given our second mention of Doctor Who by Ian, this time questioning who the guy is and why they don't know his real name.
That's not his name. Who is he? Doctor Who?
Then, the Doctor is kidnapped, and Susan starts screaming hysterically, leading to her collapsing on a sand dune.
Something terrible happened to him. I know that. We must find it.
Susan, we'll find him, I promise you. He can't be far away.
It was genuinely the most ludicrous moment of the entire serial. She just ran around screaming and then dived onto a sand dune. I mean, what if this was an alien planet? And what if that sand melted your face off? Honestly, I thought you had better survival skills than this, Susan. Sort yourself out. So now we go back to the tribe, and a few questions arose that I noted down. The cavemen keep saying that orb will bring fire to the tribe, and I'm sitting here thinking, who is this orb? Are they an alien? Are they a time traveler? Like, what's going on here? It took me an embarrassingly long time to work out that orb was their word for the sun. Yeah, I was mortified. I was absolutely mortified. I got all the way to the end of this episode when I had that realization, and I felt incredibly dumb. One thing that the book makes a little clearer than the TV episode is the relationship between Zar and the old woman, called Old Mother in the book. I might have missed a line or two of dialogue, or references may have gone over my head, but I wasn't aware that Old Mother was actually Zar's mother, which makes their interactions even more interesting. She's constantly chiding him, telling him he's not good enough to be a leader, and he won't be able to make fire no matter how hard he tries. I appreciated that the book explained this dynamic because it does change the context of a lot of their later moments within this episode as well. Cal returns to the tribe with good news. He's seen the Doctor shoot fire from his fingers? Like, come on, guys. What are we doing here? Shooting fire from fingers? Yeah, okay. Cal claims that the tribe should make him leader because he's found them a fire maker. The cavemen beef over leadership was actually quite funny because they were so poetic about it. I really didn't expect cavemen to be just dropping bars on each other like they were, but it was genuinely impressive. At this point, the Doctor has woken up and instantly snaps into survival mode. You might wonder what the Doctor's going to do here. Is he going to deliver a dramatic monologue? Is he going to fight them in hand-to-hand combat? Or is he C, going to run away? If you answer D, none of the above, you would be correct, because this guy just plays the pensioner card. I mean, he was 2 seconds away from faking a heart attack and getting his bus pass out. Obviously, this plan wasn't going to work. And if it wasn't for the trio ambushing the tribe at the perfect moment, then the Doctor most likely would have been killed. The ambush from Ian, Barbara and Susan was poorly thought out, to say the least. They kind of just charged in and hoped for the best, but none of them were particularly well equipped for combat, so the cavemen overpowered them immediately. If they had thought about it for 2 seconds, they would have realised that charging into a room full of primitive humans was probably not the wisest idea. Where does the Doctor find these people? Zod decides to send the intruders to the Cave of Skulls, which is the first time we've heard the episode title be named within the episode, and I was intrigued to see what it would look like. It sounds mysterious, it sounds creepy, and I think for the most part the show delivered a really cool set design for this. I liked the walls littered with skulls and the random skeletons just lying around, and I genuinely questioned whether this was appropriate imagery for a children's TV show. After all, the show was originally designed to be an educational program exploring scientific ideas and famous moments in history. However, the chilling end to the second episode saw the gang discover that all of the skulls within the Cave of Skulls had all been killed in the same way. They'd had their skull split open with what looks like a knife. Once again, children are watching, and we're casually just showing skulls with deep gashes in their head. Okay, Doctor Who, I wasn't aware of your game. There were a few moments in the episode that the book expanded on, which I noted as potentially important to mention. The Geiger counter gets smashed when the Doctor is kidnapped by Cal, which helped answer a question I had about the ending of the story. Susan mentioned the chameleon circuit, despite the word not being mentioned within the actual episode. Clearly a little bit of revisionism from Terrance Dicks here. There was a short scene following Susan, Ian and Barbara racing through the forest to find the Doctor, which was missing from the episode. I mentioned earlier that it felt like something was missing, so I'm glad the book added a short section in to bridge the gap, even if it didn't quite explain why they randomly ambushed the tribe. Whilst the caveman melodrama is far from over, I actually really enjoyed this episode. It developed our 4 main characters a lot more, giving us insight into each of them, as well as how they're interacting in this new environment, but also it introduced us to a whole new group of people and a whole new way of living. Whilst there will be limited character development for most of the cavemen, I actually really liked the fact that it perfectly juxtaposes our protagonists and it gives us a sense of, ooh, this is something new, something exciting, something we can sink our teeth into and learn from how cavemen acted back in the day. I mean, they're already speaking English, so they're pretty far advanced if you ask me. The Forest of Fear is our 3rd installment in this story, and it opens with our heroes trapped in the Cave of Skulls. If I keep saying that as dramatically as possible, maybe it will start to feel a little bit more dramatic in the episode. Oftentimes, Doctor Who can feel a little devoid of stakes, especially when the Doctor and his companions have impenetrable plot armour, unless it happens to be a finale. The episode actually opens with a rare moment from the Doctor, and it's the first time we see this happen on screen. The Doctor apologises to his companions.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I'm desperately sorry.
I was genuinely stunned, but I guess he feels bad for allowing himself to get kidnapped and for dragging his granddaughter and the 2 people he kidnapped into this crazy situation. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe this is karma for the Doctor. After all, they're only here because of him. Back in the caveman cave, I know, it's not a particularly catchy name. We see all of the cavemen sleeping on the floor, huddled together for warmth. As the sleeping cavemen lie still, Old Mother rouses and decides to steal Zar's knife, wandering out of the cave. Now, if you'll recall, Old Mother seemed extremely hesitant to the idea of fire being introduced to the tribe, so I was certain she was heading to go murder the people who the tribe thought could make fire. The signs were all pointing in one direction, but I thought the bloody murder of the Doctor, Ian, Barbara and Susan might be a little bit too much for tea time television in 1963. Back in the Cave of Skulls, the Doctor and the gang are trying to cut their rope ties, and Ian seems to be having no luck with the rocks in the room. I wrote in my notes, why don't they just use the bones around them to free themselves? And then, as if by telepathy that transcended over 60 years, the Doctor said exactly the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that I deserve writing credits, but I could potentially have a claim to Steph Coburn's rights. I'm just saying. As Barbara mentions that she is scared, the Doctor utters a line I've only ever seen written down, so it was nice to finally hear the man speak it himself.
Fear makes companions of all of us. That's right.
It's a dramatic moment that is followed by Old Mother bursting through some bushes into the Cave of Skulls. I have to hand it to Carol Ann Ford because whenever the script tells her to scream, she makes sure you can hear her from miles away. It's a blood-curdling scream that catches you off guard, and I genuinely almost dropped my drink whilst watching this segment. However, the plot thickens even more. Back in the cave, her watches Old Mother leave and wakes Zar to inform him of the situation. The caveman melodrama kicks in again, and I feel like I'm watching an episode of Coronation Street in 2025. All we need is a scene set in a police station and we're pretty much sorted. Her and Zar make their way to the Cave of Skulls, and they realise they're too late, and Old Mother is mysteriously already inside. No one has moved the rock blocking the exit, so clearly, Old Mother was doing Jesus miracles before Jesus was around. Now, as I've mentioned, I was really expecting Old Mother to start hacking and slashing, brutalising our heroes before they'd even had a chance to start exploring the universe. But she actually was there to help them escape, which was a weird change in direction. It was a really nice subversion of my expectations, because not only was she not wanting to hurt our protagonists, neither were Zar and her, who were hoping to rescue them. At this point, are they actually in any danger? Well, yes, actually, because we're about to venture into the scariest place of them all. Yes, even scarier than the Cave of Skulls. We're heading into the Forest of Fear. Honestly, you can tell the writers were having a lot of fun naming these places because they're so goddamn dramatic. Can you imagine doing that today? The Playground of Peril. The Shop of Suffering. The Nail Salon of Nightmares. Actually, that last one had a ring to it. In the book, Old Mother has a more concrete and solid motivation that isn't as explicit on the screen. In the book, she is described as being scared of fire, believing it to be a punishment from an unknown force, as her husband never returned when he went out hunting, and he was a firemaker. The book makes her out to be a little less senile and roots her fear of fire in a place that is actually stemming from emotion. Her reluctance to let Zar make fire could essentially be a motherly instinct, wanting to protect him from any retribution. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I definitely liked this edition. Out in the Forest of Fear, they begin to run away from the cave, as there appears to be some kind of friction as to who is leading the group. The Doctor seems to be the de facto leader, but Ian challenges him and questions why he should be in charge of them. Ian clearly hasn't seen the show before because the Doctor is always in charge, no matter how much you try and argue with him. As they continue to escape, Barbara trips over and falls in front of a rotting pig carcass. Again, I was surprised they showed something so visceral on screen, and it seems my thoughts were shared by Jacqueline Hill, who questioned this moment when they were filming. Evidently, kids have stronger stomachs than most, so they decided to keep it in. Unfortunately, Zar and her were right on their tails when a mysterious creature appeared off screen and mauled Zar. He manages to fight it off, but the injuries seem to be grave. At this point, I'm thinking, wow, are we about to witness our first ever death on Doctor Who? I might keep a kill count on screen to really keep a track of how gory these stories are. Unfortunately for the kill count, Zar didn't die because Ian and Barbara miraculously knew what to do to save them. At this point, I'm questioning whether these two are actually teachers because how are they so quick to work all this out? They even fashion a stretcher from 2 sticks and a few coats. Who are these people? Where did you find them, Doctor? This entire scene played out the same in the book, except we're given a lot more information about the animal attack. Firstly, we're told in a roundabout way that it's a saber-toothed tiger, and we're also given a short section told from the animal's point of view, observing the strangers and feeling reluctant to pounce, but striking when the animal recognizes the cavemen as easy prey. The attack of the animal is also examined a lot better, and Zar's injuries are described as deep slashes to the arm and shoulder. Not exactly the craziest injuries, because the show was making it out like he was on death's door. We also get a moment where it appears as if the Doctor is about to murder Zar rather than bring him back to the TARDIS for treatment. It's a dark moment because this man is usually all about saving people, and yet he was close to murdering a caveman so they could escape. Fortunately, Ian stopped him, but can you imagine if that hadn't happened? We haven't checked in back at the cave for a while. Shall we see what's on Cavemen TV today? Oh, it's Cal, who has noticed that everyone important in the story is no longer sleeping in the cave, so he's feeling lonely and isolated. He finds Old Mother in the Cave of Skulls, and she admits that she freed the Doctor and his friends, much to Cal's chagrin. He then returns to the tribe and informs them their prisoners have gone. Dramatic, I know, but when they return to the Cave of Skulls, yeah, I should probably stop doing that now. It is getting a little bit tiresome. Anyway, they find her dead with a deep gash in her forehead. Remember that aforementioned kill count? We officially have our first death of the show. I can guarantee you it's not even the last of this story. Now, Old Mother's death confused me because the last time we saw her, she was alive. But Cal is telling the tribe that Zar did it and then left with the prisoners? And all of a sudden Cal is now the leader of the tribe? What kind of a dictatorship is going on here? Something ain't adding up here and something's smelling fishy. And I ain't even talking about these unwashed cavemen. The book actually describes the moment of Old Mother's death very clearly and very plainly. And this ties into a character trait of Cal that is much clearer in the book. Cal is a lot more cunning and sly in the novel, believing himself to be the leader and lying and manipulating people into believing his deception. The show almost plays him as a dumb caveman, but the book actually gives him a lot more agency and explains his thought patterns more so we can truly see how conniving this guy really is. Now, the end of this episode was a bit abrupt, and I felt like we were losing a lot of connecting scenes that would have helped bridge this gap. In the last scene, we saw Cal assuming leadership over the tribe back at the cave, and in the next scene, the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, Susan, her, and Zar, who's still on the makeshift stretcher, come out of the forest of fear and glimpse the TARDIS before being ambushed by the tribe. Now, I'm not calling bullshit on this cliffhanger, but I'm calling bullshit on this cliffhanger because how on earth did this happen? I suppose you could justify it as the Doctor and company getting lost, whereas Cal would know exactly where to go. But the fact these scenes happened back to back, it just felt like they were slightly out of place and some of the scenes needed reshuffling. The cliffhanger isn't bad, but is weakened by the complete lack of respect for the audience's spatial awareness. A disappointing end to episode 3, but can episode 4 bring it back? Let's find out. The fourth and final part of this story is rather predictably called The Firemaker. It's a lot less dramatic than the previous two titles, but I think it serves its purpose. Now, you might be wondering how our heroes are going to survive this ambush from the cave people. Yes, I'm being inclusive now. Well, they are taken back to the cave, and I was actually surprised to witness a very well-written scene. Cal is trying to blame the murder of Old Mother on Zar, who is unable to speak for himself due to his life-threatening injuries. However, the Doctor is having none of it, and tricks Cal into revealing himself as the murderer, which shocked everyone, and they all cast him out with stones. The only person that wasn't shocked by this was me, because I'd already suspected that he was the one that brutally murdered that icon. It was actually a really great scene as we got to see the Doctor work his magic and calm the situation down, whilst also revealing the true intentions of the bad guy. This was a defining moment for Hartnell's Doctor in this episode, and I have really appreciated it. So now that Cal's gone, Ian and Barbara have saved Zar, and the Doctor has managed to prove Zar's innocence, you'd think that they'd be sent on their way and everyone would live happily ever after. If you thought this, you're an idiot. because Zar sent them right back to that Cave of Skulls. The show clearly thought that this was an expensive backdrop because they've spent a lot of time going back to this location. I'm not angry about it, but it does feel like the story's starting to go in circles now. So, in the Cave of Skulls, Ian is attempting to make fire from the limited resources he has around him. There's a funny conversation between Zar and her that intercut these scenes that boiled down to her misunderstanding what Ian's name was, and she came to the conclusion that it was actually friend. Like I said, they really nailed the cave people way of talking and speaking, because there was even a great moment where Zar realized working together is better than working independently. These cave people are absolutely thriving thanks to the Doctor and his friends. Maybe they should go around the galaxy and deliver self-help seminars every now and then. Ian finally makes fire and Zar is absolutely entranced by what he sees in front of him. I was looking at this guy staring at the fire and thought to myself how simple life must have been back then if a flame genuinely excites someone that much. This moment was followed by Zar asking Ian if he was the leader of the group, which you'll remember he claimed to be back in the Forest of Fear, but this time he gives the title of leader to the Doctor, which was a beautiful moment. This entire story has been about trust, and finally, it seems like Ian and Barbara explicitly trust the Doctor now. Surprise! Cal has returned to wreak havoc on the tribe that shunned him, and he murders the guard outside the cave. Once again, I was a little surprised by the nature of the violence being portrayed on screen, but that does mean our kill count is up to 2. However, if you thought this moment was bad, the scene that followed was downright barbaric. Cal confronts Zar and the pair erupt into combat, slashing their axes, rocks, and eventually using large stones to bash the other's brains in. It was a grisly scene intercut with shots of the Doctor, Barbara, Ian and Susan looking horrified as they watched these two cavemen viciously attack each other. Even I was sat there thinking, hang on a minute. This is a little bit much. It was hard to tell who was who during the fight, which might have been a limitation of the black and white picture quality, but it almost added to the drama and tension. I genuinely was unsure who was winning during various stages of the fight, only for Zar to emerge victorious, having smashed Cal's skull in with a huge rock. Kill count is up to 3, and it's our first villain death of the show. That's exciting. The book actually finishes this section with one of the best lines of the entire novel. Now, there was one more shattered skull in the Cave of Skulls. Terrance Dicks is a fantastic writer, because that line, genius. After giving Zar fire, you'd expect Zar to let them go so they can return to wherever they came from. If you thought that, you'd be wrong once again. Honestly, you guys need to give up hope that they've got any chance of escaping at this point. As Zar leaves them alone in the Cave of Skulls, Susan comes up with a plan that, on paper, is absolutely ridiculous. When she said, let's put fire in some skulls, on some sticks and act like we died, I genuinely paused the episode and let out a cry of what the fuck. But then in practice, this actually worked, and the cave people were absolutely astonished and petrified by the flaming skulls. I think I forgot how dumb cave people actually were, and so this was actually a really smart plan. Also, fire in black and white looks really weird. That's not something that I've noticed before. Fortunately, the Doctor and his friends managed to escape the Cave of Skulls, navigate their way through the Forest of Fear, and make it all the way back to the TARDIS with very little issue. Barbara continues her trend of tripping over, which was a really funny moment. It was a satisfying escape from a dangerous situation, especially when the cave people realised they'd been fooled and gave chase to the escaping prisoners. Finally back in the TARDIS, the Doctor informs Barbara and Ian that he won't be able to take them back to 1963 because he can't control where the TARDIS goes. So let me get this straight. The Doctor kidnapped Barbara and Ian to prove to them that the TARDIS was real and that the TARDIS could work, but he did so with no actual plan of how to get back home. Right. Okay. I was actually in shock and horror because that was a very reckless and crazy thing to do, especially with two people whose first adventure has seen them almost die at least 4 or 5 times. Obviously, for storytelling reasons, it's better if the TARDIS can't be controlled, so the element of surprise and unpredictability is there for the audience as well as the characters. But what's the point in the Doctor having a time machine if he doesn't know how to use it? Actually, that's very in keeping with the Doctor's character because he still doesn't really know how to use it. So you might wonder what the cliffhanger of this episode is going to be. I was wondering whether there would even be one as we had approached the end of the episode, but After whoosh whoosh time, they land in a brand new location with the monitor showing a strange jungle looking environment. Knowing the next story, I'm gonna hazard a guess that we've landed on Skaro, which is the home planet of the Daleks. We'll get to know the Daleks a little more intimately in the next episode, but let's just say they're not the friendliest of creatures. But that wasn't the cliffhanger. We were actually left on Susan checking the radiation monitor on the TARDIS console, reporting that it was absolutely normal, and then wandering off as the radiation monitor started ticking up and up until it hit danger. So it looks like we're heading into a dangerous environment in the next episode, but I'm sure everything's gonna be alright. Right? The book actually gives us a tease of what's to come on this mysterious planet, giving a brief explanation of the danger ahead, but I have to be honest, I'm super excited to watch it now, so stay tuned for an episode on that in the future. So now that we've finished breaking down the entire story, let's talk about it as a whole. The first part is genuinely a perfect introduction to the whimsical world of Doctor Who. We're introduced to key players in a matter of minutes, and there's a whole lot of intriguing questions that demand answers. The remaining parts delve more into the historical side of Doctor Who, giving us a caveman soap opera as the struggle for power revolves around who can make something as simple as fire. There are shocking moments in this story, like the death of Old Mother and the big fight between Cal and Zar, but sometimes it can feel like we're going around in circles, especially with the constant imprisonment of the Doctor and his friends. Regardless, I enjoyed my time watching this episode, especially when there were moments that genuinely caught me off guard, and I appreciated the episode for what it was, an introduction to a show that is still going on to this day. But that's all we've got time for today, so I hope you guys have enjoyed this first little delve into Doctor Who. We'll be back at some point in the future with the next instalment, aptly named The Daleks. So hopefully you'll join us then. But until then, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Do all that YouTube stuff that you guys do so well. And I will see you guys in the next episode, whenever that may be. But until then, keep on ranting. And I'll see you guys later. Bye now. See ya.